You look so silly. I can't, it looks so odd. Your thighs must be chafing on the fucking raw wood that you're riding on. That was crazy!
Pause.
Wait, that was
What?
crazy!
Yo.
That
Yo,
was
pause.
wild! Witchspire is an open-world creature collector adventure game where your goal is to become the ultimate witch, powerful enough to vanquish all evil, and a game that very clearly wears its influences on its sleeve. It's very obviously a game that seeks to combine the open-world adventure of Breath of the Wild era Zelda with the creature collecting and battling of modern era Pokemon. The interesting thing about combining these two game styles in particular is that they've both been widely criticized for not exactly working in their respective genres. The newer Zelda games have found issues in balancing their focus on an open world with the more intimate, careful level designs that older Zeldas are known for, and the newer Pokemon games are, not super well liked. Witchspire is a game whose biggest challenge is taking these disparate gameplay styles, combining them together, and coming out on the other end with the game looking greater than the sum of its parts. Will it succeed? Well, I've gotten the opportunity to interview the lead producer of Invar Games, as they've chosen to sponsor this video, and talk to them about what they think makes their game so good. I've also got my own thoughts on what their game excels at, what could use some improvement, and one massive thing that should be fixed as the game moves forward. Can Witchspire truly combine modern Zelda and Pokemon? Well, let's find out. First, let's highlight the Zelda-inspired half of the game. Witchspire operates off of a similar structure to that of the Wild-era Zelda games. You start on an island, isolated from the rest of the game world, where you must learn the main mechanics before you gain the ability to fly, leaving the island you're stuck on in order to find your friends who have gone missing. Sounds fairly familiar. After doing so, you learn that you must go to different parts of the world to do something before coming back to the center of the world and finishing the game. The progression structure of Witchspire is very similar to that of Breath of the Wild, and honestly Zelda games in general, and the developers clearly understand what makes the Zelda formula work so well. What games inspired the design of the game? So not necessarily the art, but the way the game is played.
If we look at the sort of overall feel of like a big open world with a feeling of adventure, it's hard not to reference Breath of the Wild. And that's one of those games that really like does open world so well and builds a nice inviting space for you to go into.
The strength of this progression system is that the player gets a set of easily understood goals, a reason to accomplish them, and the general path toward finishing the game. The base goal of find your friends never becomes lost in the player's mind because the reminder is always visually present, but the game also doesn't place a huge amount of emphasis on completing the journey as quickly as possible. There's enough else to do in the way of training and raising your monsters, building houses and structures, and generally exploring the world, that completing the main goal will likely fade into the back of a player's mind as an afterthought until they get bored. Then once the player wonders what they have to do next, boom, it's right there and there and there. It's a wonderful way to keep the player's attention throughout their journey of becoming the ultimate magic wielder. It also helps that, like Wild-era Zelda, you're constantly being given new weapons and resources to wield. It wasn't uncommon for me or my friends to stumble upon a new area we hadn't found before, and inside there would be a completely new wand, with a separate set of spells I had never seen before. Yuki, I understand what you said, but I thought you said The constant stream of new content to consume helps keep the game feeling fresh after several hours. One of the game's greatest strengths is that it splits up its areas into individual islands. There's no shortage of things to collect, between flight pillar orbs that allow you to access more areas of each island, new weapons and gear to find, enemy encampments to loot, and of course, brand new monsters to tame, which we will get into later. But Witchspire lacks something that would really enhance the exploration experience. That being side quests. More than just giving the player new stuff to do, side quests are one of the easiest ways to make the world feel lived in and alive. For as barren as Breath of the Wild's world could feel at times, the townspeople peppered across Hyrule are those rare moments where the game's environment really sells the player on it being a lived-in society. A large part of that is meeting people who are willing to give you side quests to go on, to fulfill some issue that they're having, and then seeing the game world change as a result. Zelda games like Majora's Mask do this especially well, having side quests that also add to the overall theme that the game is trying to impart onto the viewer. These quests aren't just about giving the player stuff to do, it's also about making your game world feel more connected, both with the player and within itself. Witchspire's world has a lot of great lore, tons of books laying around that tell you about this pretty cohesive history that the devs clearly put a bunch of time into, but the lack of actual NPCs to talk to can make the world feel a little surface level at times. I'm not saying there needs to be huge lived-in towns like in Zelda or Skyrim. This world is clearly in something of a post-apocalyptic state, but an NPC here and there to give you a side quest occasionally would be nice. That aside, Witchspire's interpolation of the wild-era Zelda formula is pretty spot on, without falling into many of the traps that are common with open-world games. Aside from the lack of significant side quests, the world is filled to the brim with stuff to find. Landmarks around the map make navigation easy and intuitive, and the variety of enemies and loot make exploration rewarding. Not to mention that upgrading your broom and finding all of the flight pillars also adds to that feeling of continuous progression, as it gives you access to new areas and makes traversal easier as a reward for the exploration. Overall, the Zelda half of Witchspire is pretty well done, which leaves us with the other half of the game's design. How does the creature collector Pokemon-esque half of the game fare in comparison? Well, for starters, the best part of the spirits in Witchspire is how they're integrated with the open world. As mentioned earlier, they essentially act as an additional collectible, with every part of the world having different monsters to catch. There's also a few different puzzles in the game that require you to command your monster in a certain way. They aren't exactly brain busters, but I appreciate the devs giving you an additional way to use your little guys to interact with the environment. Additionally, each of the monsters have a different extra function that's used in the game's crafting and survival systems, which further incentivizes the player to gather more monsters together. Not a single one will go unused. They will all be put to work for the greater good of our coven. The main function of these spirits is on the combat. At the start of the game, your monster does very little damage to enemies, forcing you to engage with them yourself in almost a complete one-on-one confrontation. But as you go through your monster's skill tree, upgrade them, level them up, the monster becomes just as powerful as you, turning it from an incredibly niche combat tool to something that could actually shift the tide of a mob fight. I like this as a way of balancing the player's strength with the monster's strength. It never straight up feels like a Pokemon game, where the monster does all of the fighting and the player character is completely superfluous. But it also never feels like the monster is useless at all either. Even at the start of the game, the monsters all have different special moves that offer a variety of different effects, from continuous streams of damage to AoE support. Also, unlike most other creature collectors, each of the monster's moves are completely unique to them, meaning you may want to switch out your monster for one with a move that's more applicable to the given situation. The game even incentivizes the player to do this, by offering the ability to quick switch between different monsters in the field. It doesn't feel like a system plucked from an entirely different style of game and forcibly shoved into Witchspire. The whole game is deliberately designed to accommodate for it, and that makes it feel less like a copy from something else, and more like a thoughtfully crafted feature inspired by a different genre. And the designs of the spirits are largely based off of Scandinavian animals, which I found really interesting.
Some of the early stuff we looked at, it's an old Swedish book, because we're a Swedish developer, which has a bunch of mammals. And so we looked a lot of that Scandinavian references, and that became an interesting place to start experimenting. But just imagining a creature as something relatively grounded, that was a good starting point for us to come up with some of these designs that look more like real animals. And once you get a couple of those done, then it starts to become easier to sort of experiment with the less realistic ones.
So yeah, based on my initial impressions on the game, Witchspire manages to nail both the Zelda and Pokemon game styles at the same time, and integrates them really well with one another. But if you'll recall, I mentioned at the beginning of the video that there's one big feature that I hope is improved upon in the future. That feature is the building. You see, the constant struggle of survival games is that of building shelter. In the ideal survival game, building shelter should be an ongoing gameplay challenge, one that requires the player to adapt and change to different variables every time they want to add to their base or build somewhere new. This should offer an interesting gameplay challenge, especially for people who want to build elaborate, complex buildings. How do you construct something so intricate and cool looking, while also allowing it to be defensible from monsters, the elements, natural disasters, and whatever else the game throws at you? This is how building should be in the ideal survival game. Some games do this well, like Terraria and Corekeeper incentivizing town building through their NPC systems. But that's not what usually happens. What often actually ends up happening is one of two things. Either the building is a complete joke, widely superfluous to the overall survival experience, providing infinite defense and shelter from anything with little to no effort, or the building is completely scrapped entirely in favor of a more nomadic, constantly moving style of gameplay. Witchspire's building is quite similar to the former example, not being super well justified by the game design itself. There isn't really a reason to build big houses or elaborate structures, since there's a single buildable object that acts as the fast travel point, not the buildings themselves. Which is unfortunate because Witchspire has one of the aesthetically coolest building systems I've seen in a game. Witchspire operates off a similar system of building to that of Valheim or Enshrouded, where pieces connect to each other in predetermined orientations. But as a game developer, you might wonder how you can contextualize building in your game so it doesn't feel disjointed. But someone in Witchspire must have had a stroke of genius, because this system is way cooler. In order to justify the building, the witches astral project themselves into a separate entity that floats around and builds stuff, which is a logical in-universe reason for there to be built-in flight to complement the building system. This is awesome, and makes the building feel completely earned on the part of the player. I'm not just playing a video game where building is a simple mechanic, I'm playing as a wizard that can transmogrify matter, and building is just a logical extension of that ability. I just wish that you had more of a reason to build things in your world. Maybe the fast travel points just shouldn't work if you haven't built a house to put the hearth in, and maybe that house has to have a certain set of things in order to brave the elements. Something simple like that could really bring the building all together and improve the game greatly. Despite that hiccup though, Witchspire is still a really fun game. Definitely worth the $20-ish it costs at the time of writing. I think it merges all of its influences together really nicely, and the developers clearly seem passionate and motivated to make something special. If it seems up your alley, I recommend giving it a try. It has co-op for up to 6 players, which made it a fun time for me and my friends, even if things can get a little janky at times.
Okay.
Why are my pecs like that? Thank you all for watching, and thank you to the Witchspire devs for supporting the channel and giving me the opportunity to check out their game. I've actually got my scope trained on an interesting subject for the next video, so you'll definitely want to stick around. I'll give you a hint. It's a sequel to one of my most popular videos. Stay tuned, and stay lucid. Bye-bye.